Good morning, everyone. Good morning from a very wild and wet Wellington. Thanks for joining us on this morning's webinar. So today's topic is around implementing more of the ArcGIS system. I do hope that wherever you are warm and dry and cozy. I think sometimes we reflect that it's nice to be outdoors, and sometimes it's nice to reflect that we are part of an indoors team and we work in an office environment. I think this week in Wellington has definitely been one of those. In terms of the team, I wanted to introduce the team who will be presenting this morning on this topic. So first of all, myself, my name is Scott Campbell. I'm the head of GIS technology at Eagle. I've also got with us today Greg Price, who's one of our Auckland-based account managers. Hey, Greg. We've got in the Christchurch office, Ed Cook, who many of you will also know. And we've got also Wellington-based with myself, Claire Thurlow, who leads our GIS training and education. So we're happy to be here this morning and talking to you on the topic of implementing more of the ArcGIS system. So a little bit of background to the topic. This topic came up really in discussions amongst this group and others in Eagle around what we were seeing out there in New Zealand and further afield with ArcGIS. So the background was that we at Eagle were very lucky, and we get to see many examples of the great work being done by Esri users like yourselves across the region. And as part of this, we saw there was some really interesting and innovative patterns that were being employed using ArcGIS. And we thought some of those might be of interest to others of you who haven't seen those before. But alongside that, there were areas where we saw opportunities to use some of the ArcGIS tools in some new areas. Some of those are the same tools you have and know in maybe in a new innovative way. And some of that is around some of the newer applications and tools which you may not be familiar with. So really today is around sharing some of the workflows and opportunities we see where ArcGIS can make a difference, not in any specific domain or industry, but across the board. And so hopefully this is of interest to you. In terms of the agenda, we're going to do a quick recap of ArcGIS. Apologies to those of you who may have seen this information before and know ArcGIS backwards, but we thought we'd give a bit of a recap to just cover what is GIS and ArcGIS. Then we'll look at some of the workflows we've identified where really we think there's a benefit in having maybe wider use of GIS, either to geo-enable our workflow or to actually enable our workflow in its entirety. Then we'll have Ed look at some of the applications that support these workflows, specifically the new applications, some of those you may not be familiar with. And then alongside that, some existing applications, which you probably are familiar with, but maybe using those in a more innovative or different kind of way. And then to close off, we'll look at how you would get started with some of these applications. And Claire's going to give us a nice summary of some of the tools and resources, including training courses, that would allow you to get started with these applications, followed by questions and answers. So speaking of questions and answers, hopefully, I know there's a Microsoft technology issue sweeping across New Zealand right now. I guess if you're on this call, it hasn't affected you. So I would like to open up the webinar for you guys to ask questions. So hopefully on the side of your panel, on the right-hand side of your screen, should be a panel where you can ask questions. So feel free to ask questions anytime throughout the webinar, and then the team will do our best to answer those at the end of the webinar. So a quick recap, as I said, what is ArcGIS? So ArcGIS is the GIS from Esri, and as Eagle here, Eagle Technology, we represent Esri in New Zealand and ArcGIS. But even taking a step back before that, we could talk about what is a GIS. And GIS really is a means of taking a digital abstraction of the real world, whether that's the real world in a built environment with buildings and underground assets, or it's the real world in terms of the natural environment. So that could be soils, it could be weather, it can be slope, all those things which exist in the real world, creating a digital version of those, and then bring them together to visualize, to analyze, and to manage the data in a variety of different ways. The key secret ingredient we have to manage all these different data sets is really layers. So a layer is an abstract concept where we bring a variety of information together in a common theme, and we use those to build a map. So combine those to build a map. And the layers you would use depend on the map you're trying to create, and the map you're trying to create would depend on the questions you're trying to answer, either for yourself or for your end users. So the combination of those layers really is the secret to a successful GIS. Another aspect to the layers themselves is really how they're comprised. So one thing that we've seen really change rapidly in the last few years is the variety of sources we can draw upon to make those layers. So gone are the days of just relying upon, if you're old enough to remember, coverages or shapefiles, which was a very GIS focused view of the world in terms of data sources. Now we've got a whole range of data sources we can bring in, which represent different data information sources, different technologies, different types of organization and different types of people. Whether it's real-time information coming through an IoT source as a layer, whether it's 3D information coming, whether it's CAD and BIM data coming from designers, architects, and engineers, or whether it's LiDAR coming from a scanned view. So we're really lucky that we've got the ability to bring these data sources in. And as probably you already know, we're particularly lucky in New Zealand in that a lot of these data sources are readily available either through Creative Commons licensing or through other mechanisms. So that's GIS, I guess, in the abstract sense. If we're talking about ArcGIS, ArcGIS is the technology from Esri, and as Eagle, as I said, we represent Esri in New Zealand and also the wider South Pacific region. So ArcGIS itself is a GIS which is specifically designed to be implemented in many different patterns. So the technology, the concept, the layers themselves are the same. But that combination of the layers and maps, and in turn the apps, is designed to support a number of different workflows, really putting the right information into the right person's hands in the right tool. So whether you're a desktop professional using ArcGIS Pro, whether you're someone out in the field using the mobile apps to capture information, or simply have the data in your hand when you need to make decisions in the field, or whether it's the use of web apps, which is probably the most widely used set of applications, ranging from Experience Builder right through to those instant apps. The information sources and layers can be exactly the same, but the application is really the right tool for the job. All of this being driven by either ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Online as the back end for the data stores. The other thing to bear in mind is the people. So this is probably the most important thing about any GIS is the people. We get excited about technology, obviously, but the people are what make it an amazing tool and make it actually solve problems. So the technology itself, as I mentioned, is designed to support different sets of applications, and those applications in turn allow us to collaborate across different groups. Those different groups can be within a team, they can be within an organization, they can be between organizations, between industries, or across regions and countries. And that's the really exciting part, that we think that these workflows we're going to show to you in the next section really span the range of different users and the range of different organizations, supporting a variety of different missions with that geographic approach at its core. So with this background, I want to pass across to Greg to speak some about those workflows that we're seeing and where these connected GIS apps can support either new or enhance existing workflows. Greg.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so what are some of these common workflows, and maybe, you know, then further down look at how we can optimize or enhance these. So first up, often us as individuals, we might use Pro or desktop in sort of a standalone mode, and we're regularly downloading data sets and producing sort of static outputs and maps and reports. Now, obviously, some of the challenges with this approach is that the outputs are out of date as soon as they're produced. There's no real access to real-time reporting or connectivity to field captured data. And also, it has a higher, you know, data maintenance overhead in that kind of workflow. So another workflow that we've got is, you know, when we quite regularly need to brief senior managers or staff, producing content with ArcGIS, but then we typically often screenshot for emails or even into PowerPoint and things like that. So again, often the briefings are out of date as soon as they're produced. And it can be time consuming and difficult to always produce engaging content amongst all the other busy work that we have to do. When we want to work with external agencies and collaborate with those organizations, layers are often coming from a variety of different organizations and put into a shared map or application. Now, some of these layers quite often need to require regular updates from multiple stakeholders. Sometimes it's yourself, but sometimes it's those other agencies need to update that information. So orchestrating all that information into one place can be somewhat challenging at times. And then providing external organizations with restricted access to be able to those layers to be able to edit them as well can be challenging. So when we're looking at now moving data, quite often it can be done manually, or it is done manually. So we're importing data, we're exporting data, we're enriching it and sending information from ArcGIS into these other systems. Obviously doing that in a manual capacity, it's time intensive and dependent on particular key staff being there, and also being in a manual process. Inaccuracies can creep into the process. So the idea is to really try and automate as much of that as possible. Also, when we're using, like today, we're using Office 365 tools, and these historically have been quite separate from ArcGIS tools. So maps and location data is not embedded within some of those day-to-day Office 365 processing steps. And we have to open different programs to get access to it. So maybe we have to close a conference call to fire up Pro or something like that, or export static data sets into tools like BI programs. So how can we bring these two worlds together? And lastly, if you're here and using GIS, quite often the GIS teams are producing fantastic authoritative data, maps, and products. However, different maps and products are often used for the external media and communications. So, some of the obstacles to why that is sometimes it can be time intensive for communications teams to request the information from the GIS team. And commonly, they may not have particular high GIS skill sets for doing any modification they may want to do. So to help us take us through and solve some of these problems, I'm going to hand back to Scott and Ed.
Awesome.
Scott.
Thank you for that, Greg.
Oh, Ed.
So how to implement more of the ArcGIS platform to address some of these challenges that Greg's walked through? Well, in this next section, we're going to look at two different aspects regarding the ArcGIS platform and how some of these components that you've commonly heard of in many of these updates and webinars over the past couple of months, how they can be fitted together with some of these common challenges and scenarios. So whether we're using new products, and we'll cover some products that enable some capabilities around simplifying the extract, transform, and loading of data, how we can use GIS to power presentations we're providing internally, and also complex editing in the cloud. How can we migrate some of our desktop users who are maybe only using it for editing, maybe into cloud-based functions? And then acknowledging some of the existing products that a lot of you know already, talking around how we can use some of those for enabling our communications teams that Greg was just referring to, talking about coordinating fieldwork for capturing some of the sources of truth into our system of record being ArcGIS, and even further bringing it into every project, chat, and task that we take part on our organisations on a day-to-day basis, how we can implement more of the ArcGIS platform into each of these scenarios and workflows. So we're going to start off with the new ArcGIS products. What are some new products and capabilities that we think you should be aware of for helping widen that footprint of who's using GIS in your organisations? Story maps briefings is one we'll cover up front. Then we'll look at the web editor application released out of beta in ArcGIS Online and emerging as a really interesting capability in enterprise also. And then looking at data pipelines, nicknamed model builder on the web by a lot of our community, but really that drag and drop interface people are familiar with in other systems coming into a web-based interface with data pipelines. So let's start with story maps briefings to kick things off. So I just want to stress that this is a new functionality within the existing story maps platform. It's a simplified authoring and also viewing experience for a lot of our users. Rather than having to produce a complex narrative, what if we just had a slide deck that was dedicated to GIS content and showcasing it for a regular audience? What's interesting is this is an online browser experience, but also a native mobile app experience. We can download these briefings and take them offline with us into the field, maybe for those toolbox chats and the likes. So where you're regularly briefing your organization using GIS content, maybe consider Story Maps briefings as an option and a component to maybe try out over the next couple of weeks to see whether it can work to further your footprint in that space. So then going into another web-based capability, the web editor. And this is really focused around extending those editing capabilities that were previously in desktop products and maybe specialist third-party add-ins, bringing them into an interface that's familiar for a lot of our users. You'll see it looks very similar to the map viewer, and that's deliberate. Being able to have that consistent user experience for whatever task you're doing across ArcGIS, and now brought into an editing experience. So this really allows you to streamline and simplify those complex topology editing workflows you're doing, leveraging smart forms, a capability that powers field maps, now brought into the attribute editing experience within the web editor. And really for those who are looking at advanced domain workflows, this is a really important app to take note of, and more capability we expect to be rolled in with subsequent updates of ArcGIS. So then going on to our third leg of the stool of new products and capabilities to be aware of is data pipelines, really allowing you inside ArcGIS Online the ability to, using a drag and drop interface, connect to different sources, use common tools that you're used to as GIS professionals, and use it to update sources that others are leveraging. So going into a little bit more detail on how this works, really there's a variety of data sources that are already supported. Interestingly, the S3 pattern, where we're seeing lots of information being stored in AWS, being able to connect to that directly from a SaaS provider, and also other data warehouse offerings like Snowflake. From here, being able to use common tools, you're familiar to these, filters, spatial joins, creating new geometries such as geocoding, and then being able to set them on a scheduled rate. So this is very similar to other offerings out there, and being able to just have that inside the ArcGIS system to maybe implement more sources of truth available to a wider audience is a really interesting pattern to consider with this one. And this is all set against a backdrop around ArcGIS being a system to create and manage your most important asset behind your people, being your data and information. So really ArcGIS with this web data import capability, the web editing capability, really allows you to take that data management practice and roll it out to your wider enterprise, as Scott mentioned up front, with ArcGIS now being that enterprise system that everyone can access. So that's a bit of a wrap up of the new capabilities. We just wanted to mention a really important tool that a lot of you use every day, and talking around extending those desktop workflows that you're no doubt familiar with on a day-to-day basis, and some other options to consider within there. So ArcGIS Pro, it's our professional desktop GIS product, market leading, and really allowing you to have advanced mapping, visualization, editing, and analysis capabilities all inside one product. So there's a variety of new tools that have come out. Flood simulation seeming to be quite a popular favorite amongst the community at the moment, alongside your spatial join workflows, being able to open up something quite Hollywood and quite useful for geodesign inside your browser. We also wanted to acknowledge here that presentations is a capability to take advantage of if you're producing layouts on a regular basis. So if you're producing paper maps for your organization, that's okay. There's always a requirement for it. For records management purposes, putting into a report really quickly. Consider alongside story maps briefings, also presentations as a way to regularly brief from your desktop GIS to the rest of your organization. So download 3.3 if you want to take advantage of both of those. For those who are already on top of it though, there's a whole world of extensions out there. on top of ArcGIS Desktop. And these allow you to do a variety of different things at a level that is world leading for a lot of these extensions. Talking to a couple of these, data interoperability extension for ArcGIS Pro. That's one that can definitely supplement and complement the workflows maybe you're looking to do with data pipelines, where maybe you're needing to connect to a variety of different sources that aren't currently supported in data pipelines, or maybe you're wanting to run them on a scheduled basis alongside some of your other third-party software that you're using for that process. We also wanted to talk a little bit to Workflow Manager. Workflow Manager has been around for a long, long time. And that's a desktop extension that if you need to really orchestrate a strict process, it's a really good tool to investigate and look at. Not to mention a lot of the analytical extensions that we have for a variety of different data formats, whether that's 3D and whether that's unstructured data that's able to be ingested into link charts and using knowledge graphs. There's a whole variety of extensions to just be aware of that could help you in your task to be more effective and efficient for producing geospatial data and outputs for your wider organization. So some existing ArcGIS products we wanted to highlight on top of Pro. Well, there are some existing capabilities out there that we think would be worth taking a bit of time to look at, because we think they're really powerful for the return on investment they give straight away once rolled out. This is a lesson identified from many organisations that we've worked with. The three we're going to be looking at in this section are field operations, the big suite of tools to support field data activities, and also looking at ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud. A little bit of a left field one, but one that you'll find a little bit interesting due to the fact that it allows you to bridge that divide sometimes between your communications teams and you as a GIS business unit, maybe on the opposite side of the universe, it seems, from those folk at times, and how you can work together. And for everyone else in your organization, how ArcGIS for Microsoft 365 can help to bridge the gap, help prevent that cognitive load of having to switch between tabs or maybe switch between screens to have maps at the forefront of every task, every chat, and every meeting that you're taking part of on a daily basis. So let's start off with field operations and have a little bit of a look at that. ArcGIS field operations encompasses 4 key applications. The first one I'm going to mention is dashboards. It's not inherently out in the field, although we have mobile views available, but really being able to have awareness of what's being captured, what's being tasked, and where people are across your organization is something that can be achieved using this tool. Going into those applications that are used heavily across New Zealand for a variety of really interesting use cases. Let's start off with field maps, really taking that map, that authoritative basis of content out into the field with you wherever you go, and then being able to add and update and sometimes delete features that aren't accurate to maintain the integrity of your information, but also having awareness of everything else that's happening out there with the location tracking capability that comes as part of that product. For those more prescribed workflows where you're capturing a really strict set of information, Survey 123, being able to take those forms, those laminated sheets and transforming them into a digital format. And then when maybe it's a little bit too daunting to capture a detailed form for every feature, being able to use quick capture as a way to rapidly capture repeatable observations and feed those straight into your GIS without needing a middle step process to convert all those awesome observations into a format that can be then used inside an information management platform like ArcGIS. So all of these connect back to that system, and that's why we think it's a really interesting pattern, if you're not considering it already, of what could you be putting inside your organization's pockets wherever they go as part of their activities to help them contribute to that really important asset being your geospatial data and information. And so some explicit opportunities to call out here with field operations in particular. Data capture. If there's a gap on your map, maybe it could be a very simple exercise to set up a quick capture project to capture areas that you're missing currently. Maybe you're wanting to plan and coordinate a lot of conflicting tasks that are happening in the same space or very close to one another. So using the likes of back office capabilities like Workforce, soon to be moved to field maps for tasking and a spatial to-do list. Maybe it's even just having a polygon layer shared between different contractors to understand the boundaries of where they're working to allow them to work really effectively on the areas that they're assigned. Maybe it's situational awareness and just wanting to know where your people are. Your most important thing as any organization will speak to is your people, and making sure you know where my stuff is, where my people are, and what's their status. So maybe even just rolling them out as a location tracking solution, a really cost-effective one, but also one that's able to be audited and used for a variety of different use cases, because it's just another layer, as Scott was mentioning earlier, that we can put into a map. And then finally, enterprise integrations. So the likes of everything you're capturing, we realize that GIS a lot of the times isn't the final destination for any information captured. It's actually a halfway point to maybe an authoritative data set that's being maintained that's non-spatial. So being able to use the likes of ArcGIS for Microsoft 365, which we'll cover shortly, as a way to, every time someone sends a record, feed it into the GIS, but also maybe send an email, maybe add it to a SharePoint list, add it to wherever it needs to be added to inform whatever task is being completed as a result of it. So that's one disparate group of users. We also wanted to talk to another disparate group of users sometimes, which is our external communications teams. And how do we enable them to have this authoritative content that everyone else is maintaining, but through a user experience that makes it really easy for them to pick up and quickly action a graphic design task under the immense constraints of time and also opinions that they have to work through in order to produce their output for the public or maybe a very important stakeholder. What's interesting with Adobe Creative Cloud and also ArcGIS is the language is fundamentally the same. Both work in layers. For graphic designers, it's more focused on the layers and elements of the page, where we're working in layers and elements of where things are in reference to one another, referencing Tobler's law there. So being able to collaborate with in-house graphic design professionals by them being able to sign in with an ArcGIS credential, find the base map they need, find the layers they need, configure them to make them work alongside the rest of the corporate branding guidelines that they have to comply to, and then export a product in the space of minutes is something that's a possibility with Adobe Creative Cloud. A lot of our professional cartographers in New Zealand swear by this as one of their tools of the trade, Adobe Illustrator being a very popular one. And realizing that through an add-in, you can enable that content that you're putting a lot of time in to be created once and used many times, not just in a GIS system, but also in a graphic design suite like Adobe. And now I guess the wider one is Microsoft 365. And how do we enable all of our knowledge workers, all of our employees who every day sign into either Outlook, Teams, Word, PowerPoint, or even Excel? How do we enable them to use the power of geography and the geographic approach to inform a lot of their decisions and activities that they're undertaking? ArcGIS for Microsoft 365 encapsulates a lot of different products. Two that we're going to highlight just now are ArcGIS for Teams and also ArcGIS for Excel. So to start off with, let's look at ArcGIS for Excel. So through using an add-in that you can install and signing in with an ArcGIS credential, suddenly unlocks a whole lot of really interesting workflows that weren't previously able to be done without a very heavy-duty ETL process writing to a local database. So using an add-in, you can connect to ArcGIS content within Excel. So you can open up a map to provide context to that spreadsheet or that table that's being looked at side by side without having to flip between different software packages. You can use functions to actually interact with the information, being able to geocode, join data sets, and even do attribute editing. So consider if you are having to extract data on a regular basis purely for the purpose of it being modified in Excel, think about the live data editing capabilities through this. That might be something you deliberately choose to withhold for a little bit until you put planning in place on how to manage that interest, or something you want to roll out straight away to prove that actually you're maintaining something in a GIS that can actually be maintained across multiple enterprise systems. One that I know everyone is using though, if they're not using Excel, because you're joining the webinar today, is Teams. And I just wanted to highlight the capabilities within this product that I think majority of organizations use for conference calling alongside Zoom and maybe Google Workspace. I just wanted to highlight the fact that this is something that already has off-the-shelf integration with ArcGIS included within it. By installing the add-in, like you can see through the video playing on screen here, then suddenly allows you to sign into your organization just like Excel and start bringing layers into conversations, into activities and tasks. without having to do too much thinking about it. You can start embedding existing ArcGIS applications as well inside channels. There might be a dashboard that's really important to a specific business unit that you've authored, rather than them having to jump into a browser, sign into ArcGIS, and from there having to hold two screens side by side. Inside the Teams channel, you could be embedding your experience builder apps, your dashboards, your story maps, and you can also create and author maps through this as well. One interesting workflow that I saw recently was a user who had an Excel spreadsheet hooked up to a feature layer inside a Teams channel that people were able to update. And then in the next tab over, we're able to view the dashboard. So really these two worlds have collided, and it's certainly one to start experimenting with and seeing whether actually it could unlock new potentials for keeping your information safe, secure, but also used and accessible. So the last capability I wanted to look at was really something that is emerging as a key area. And talking with the head of GIS technology, Scott, we really wanted to bring this in and do a little bit of a spotlight on this. So speaking of large enterprise system integrations, Scott, I'll hand over to you to talk around the exciting possibilities with Autodesk.
Cool, thanks, Ed. And extra 10 points to Ed for mentioning Tobler's law of geography, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So Ed covered a couple of examples there where the integration has been done pretty much off the shelf between the Adobe tools and ArcGIS, between the Microsoft tools and ArcGIS. And the third one we wanted to focus on today was the Autodesk integration to ArcGIS. So it comes in a variety of different ways. Essentially, there's a lot of work being done between Esri and Autodesk directly to make sure the integration is much simpler, that the data quality and fidelity can be maintained when you're moving, for example, BIM data into ArcGIS or the other way around. And that's there's a number of tools in ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Pro to do that. The application we wanted to focus on today is GeoBIM. So GeoBIM really is a relatively new application. It's been built through that close collaboration between Esri and Autodesk. And it brings together both the ArcGIS, Autodesk, ArcGIS datasets and Autodesk Construction Cloud, or BIM 360 on the other side, and places the project information from BIM 360 into a geographic context using that geographic approach that Ed mentioned. So it's web-based experience. There's no need to actually install software to have this experience. And it really allows you to transform AEC projects with the geospatial context, whatever that may be. It could be soils, it could be the lay of the land, it could be elevation, it could be underground assets, whatever. All of those rich GIS assets that you have, making those available to people who are working in the construction and engineering and architecture worlds. So in terms of what that achieves, it allows you to use that real world location to better manage the project lifecycle, for example, manage risks, manage the costs and timelines. We've got a short video here, which I think is running. Yep, it's running. Okay, that just illustrates a few of those workflows. We'll see how we do in terms of time running through it. But essentially, web-based interface. In this case, we've got a project we're looking at. In this, first of all, the geographic view. This is a new building being constructed in Europe alongside a railway. We're looking at the geographic view. By selecting an asset in the geographic view, that brings up the BIM 360 viewer for that really high fidelity view where we can drill down and look at it with a much more detail than you would typically expect within the GIS. GIS, obviously, you can bring a lot of rich information through, but having the information linked with the business side inside of BIM 360, that's really the value we have there. And there's one other bit in this video I wanted to highlight to you. We'll skip forward in a second. Yeah, okay, so now we're looking at inside the building. In this case, we've got a lot of information which maybe wouldn't be brought through into a GIS, but with the integration within BIM, between Autodesk and Esri, we can now see that here. We're using the layer switcher widget there, you can see, to select by widget. We can select specific entities in that geographic space. And in this case, we're bringing up information around the both the mechanics of it and the next level of detail within the BIM world. So I guess the technology, there's a lot to look at in terms of the video. It's a number of workflows it supports. It's really about bringing two groups of people together, using that geographic approach to unify two different groups. And whether you and your organizations have a team who work in this space using the Autodesk tools, or whether it's collaboration with external organizations, we think that BIM 360 is a really interesting tool to look at, really, and the barrier to entry should be pretty low given that it's a web browser interface. So the benefits are putting projects on the map, as we saw there, putting that geographic context into projects, which is a whole bunch of inherent benefits, accessing the critical information from the GIS to connect through to the BIM world and see maybe more information, documentation, safety information, etc. The underlying feature that it's designed to improve is the collaboration between different parties, as I said, between different teams in the same organization, or even between organizations. And one of the things we've seen that when people are using it, a real benefit is to minimize the amount of data conversion. As much fun as it is to use ETL tools to take a BIM model and turn it into a GIS, and sometimes that's the answer, we can minimize the amount of conversion and maybe the downscaling and down quality aspects of moving information between different systems, so linking them instead of ETL. So that's some of the benefits we're seeing. And we've got a number of organizations in New Zealand who are using this right now, but maybe we're interested in seeing how organizations who maybe don't see themselves as AAC organizations, maybe you're a council, how could you use this to collaborate on projects? And the very last tool we wanted to talk about was a tool for imagery. So imagery, you've maybe heard me say before, kind of when I was learning GIS back in the day, imagery or raster was kind of the poor cousin of vector. It really has changed, both because of the availability and quality of imagery from a variety of sources, from satellites, from aerial, from terrestrial, and also from drone coverage. But also the tools that allow us to manage, to extract information from, analyze, and share this amazing resource have also come on leaps and bounds. So traditionally, this was the area of where you'd be using desktop tools with specialist users using those tools to bring data sets in, manage them, analyze them, extract features if needed, and then share those. With the new extension, or relatively new extension for ArcGIS Online, called ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online, we're really opening that up to a new group of users, we'd like to think. And we're interested and excited about how that can actually support different workflows. So the most simple workflow, perhaps, in terms of using the ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online is a mouthful to say. The ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online extension is really about bringing data through and sharing it. So if we can step through that just now, the simple first step is we're going to upload and publish imagery to ArcGIS Online. So we can use a variety of different standard connectors and formats to bring that data into ArcGIS Online using the web interface. Once it's in there, step two is we're selecting the type of image service. What do we want to do with this? Do we want to create a tiled image, or do we want to create something that's more dynamic with that level of analysis happening? Step three is about choosing whether we do want to do some analytics on that. So we can simply be taking imagery in, RGB or multispectral imagery in, and sharing that out, or we can be doing some form of analysis. And this is a really exciting extra step, because this is something that previously was not possible using cloud-based and web-based tools. Imagery analysis capabilities within ArcGIS Online now have really opened that up to do feature extraction and a whole range of things. And then finally, step four is we're assuming you're going to want to share the results of this work out to a bigger group. So whether that's in your organization publicly or to other people through groups in other organizations, that streaming the imagery out to others is the final step that really opens up imagery and democratizes the data sets that you've got in your organization out to others in a raster format. So I think hopefully you've got a sense of both the workflows that we're seeing out there being geo-enabled, both using the existing GIS tools and some new ones that you may not be familiar with. Thanks, Ed, for showing some of those cool new tools. What I wanted to do now was pass across to Claire to give us some information about how we can learn more about these tools and get started if you think you've got an interest in them. Claire.
Thanks, Scott. So as Scott mentioned, I'm just going to have a little brief talk about how you can learn more about some of the products that we've talked about today. And the first one was we spent a very brief time in ArcGIS Pro. And if you want to expand your skill set in ArcGIS Pro, we do have an ArcGIS Pro Essential Workflows course, which we recommend for the basic workflows, but also for some of your more advanced workflows, such as analysis and sharing information to the rest of the ArcGIS platform. I wanted to also mention at this particular point that if you are migrating still from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro, we do have a migrating course as well that you can have a look at, which comes to ArcGIS Pro more from a perspective that you really know ArcMap and you want to be able to translate what you know in ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro, and that's where that course actually comes from. So feel free to contact me or to use the GIS training at Eagle email address to contact the team about some more information on that. The last two products that Scott mentioned were ArcGIS GeoBIM and ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online, and both of those have some nicely structured training materials available for them to learn how to use the basics of those products. And the tutorial series is available without having to log into any Esri system to actually access the materials, whereas the ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online requires you to have a username and password to log into the Esri Academy site to access that information. The last specific course that I wanted to mention, or specific bit of training I wanted to mention, was our Optimizing Field Operations with ArcGIS course. And this is once again an instructor-led course, and it goes through those mobile devices or products that Ed mentioned in that section of this webinar. And so Survey 123, Quick Capture, Field Maps and Dashboard. We also touched very briefly on Workforce, which again was an application that Ed touched on briefly as well. We do have this course available coming up next week. You can still actually apply to attend it. So it's not next week, it's the week after, in our instructor assisted learning lab format. So this is where you can come into our new Wellington Education Centre and run through the course with an instructor through a video, and then there is also an instructor in the classroom as well to answer any questions that you have around the material that you're looking at. I will be the instructor in the room on the 13th or 14th of August, depending on which day you decide to do that particular course. Now, we've mentioned a whole bunch of other applications, and while some of them don't have any formal training through the Esri Academy that you can do or through Eagle that you can do, they all do have tutorials associated with them. And so we've just put the link up to the tutorials for ArcGIS. This is always the first place that learning resources appear for a new product that you might be wanting to explore how to use. Other resources that you might be interested in connecting to and finding out about new things that are coming in the product stack or in ArcGIS platform. There's the ArcGIS blogs, that's new products, but also existing products and how to use them as well. There's always the ArcGIS documentation to fall back on, which is a brilliant resource to have at your fingertips. And then they will also have ArcGIS for developers if you're wanting to look into more of the back end of ArcGIS and the APIs that Ed mentioned also very, very briefly. And as always, if there is any training that we offer at Eagle Technology, you can access that via our website and the QR code that you see there on the screen as well. Okay, that's us from the new information that we're bombarding you with for this webinar. But we just want to have an open session to try and answer any questions that you might actually have around what we've talked about. And so I've got a question here from somebody, and I might throw this to you, Ed. It's around the story map briefings, and it's a question, very specific question, asking if it's actually a replacement for PowerPoint or could be used as a replacement for PowerPoint.
Yeah, really interesting point in the answer up front is yes, if it's focused specifically around geographic content in that existing PowerPoint presentation that you're looking to replace. So there's also presentations that we mentioned inside Pro, which enables you to create a layout in a slide template format and export it out as a PowerPoint presentation. So yes, you could be replacing some PowerPoints that you're using on a regular basis, or maybe look at how you could be using them for different use cases based on what the messaging is you want to communicate and what the content is that supports it.
Cool, thanks for that, Ed. Another question here around ArcGIS image for ArcGIS Online, and you're right, Scott, it is quite a mouthful there, that product name. I'm going to throw this one to you, and just a query, it's more of a, why should I use this product instead of the image service capabilities that are available through ArcGIS Enterprise?
So a good question, and I guess it's not a replacement for the image service capabilities in ArcGIS Enterprise. It's just an alternative option for those organizations who, not everyone has ArcGIS Enterprise. So ArcGIS Enterprise has got a strong image capability. It's been around for a long time. And so this is a SaaS side-by-side offering for those orgs who don't have Enterprise or do want to take advantage of some of the cloud processing capabilities that online offers. In the same way you can use credits for your data storage and so on. With ArcGIS Online mainstream, with this extension, you're allowed to do similar things, but for imagery or a variety of raster formats.
Cool, thanks for that, Scott. And a question about Adobe Creative Cloud. It's just around the licensing of that connector between the ArcGIS. And somebody just really wanted clarification. You have to have the Adobe Creative Cloud license to be able to use that ArcGIS plugin to it.
Correct. Yeah. So you're not getting licensing to both systems when you buy one or the other. You have to be licensed for both separate stacks in order to use them. And with the recent licensing changes, if you are using an ArcGIS Online based licensing model, you have the ability to access some of those capabilities straight away using the ArcGIS platform. But just stressing once again, yeah, you do need to be licensed for Adobe before being able to use that bridge. Back to you, Claire.
Oh, and one last question, and this one's quite a specific one as well. Some people are currently using ArcGIS Suite as a product, which is out of Esri UK. And just wondering, with the ArcGIS web editor, they're thinking, oh, there might be some crossover between those two products. Is the ArcGIS web editor a replacement for ArcGIS Suite, or is it just something that can be used to enhance the workflows? And I'm going to pass that to Scott because he's got his hand up.
Thanks, Claire. So ArcGIS Suite is a tool, as you said, which is available through Eagle, created by our cousins over in Esri UK. It's an advanced web-based editing tool, and there's a utility version of it too. A lot of the capabilities that are in there have also been incorporated inside of the ArcGIS web editor. So actually there's a common development core there now happening, which is awesome. But in terms of roadmap, there's no plans to fully replace the ArcGIS Suite capabilities within that web editor. So it will form really a subset of it. You'll see a lot of commonality, like the topology checking online client side, so you can't digitize outside of a box before you hit save and so on. So some of those core ones will be the same, but in terms of the advanced functionality for Suite, my understanding is that for the roadmap, there's no plans to fully replicate the Suite capability inside the web editor from Esri.
Cool, thanks for that response, Scott. And I'm just going to leave it open for a couple of minutes. If you want to drop another question in the question box, it's down on, it should be on the right side of your Teams to be able to ask that question. While we're waiting to see if any more questions actually come in, I just wanted to thank the team who've been online with us today talking about the different applications that we've talked about. And so thanks to Scott, Greg, Ed and myself, obviously. That feels a bit awkward thanking myself, but
Thanks,
great
Claire.
to have you here to talk a little bit more about some of the different products that we can implement inside of the ArcGIS platform. We're now back to a word, the platform rather than ArcGIS System. So that's a new development from Esri UC onwards. So we're going to have to retrain our brains.
So we've had a question come through in the chat. So is web editor intended for mobile users as opposed to desktop users? A great question. Just for everyone's benefit, we've replied in the chat with a comment, but just reading it out so everyone's aware. Field maps is the intended mobile capability. So if you're needing to have editing workflows out there in the field, that's where really field maps comes in. The web editor is focused really for those web editing workflows where you're using a browser, and you want to have those tools that previously you'd only be able to use desktop or Suite as mentioned for. So just making that distinction really clear. Any comments, Scott, on top of that?
No, it's a good question. I guess there obviously on top of that would be the scenario where you're using an appropriate device like a tablet, something with a big screen real estate, where some of the web editing tools could come into their own if you're in a connected environment. But complex, accurate editing in the field is difficult, right? It's not, especially on a day like today when the weather's like this. I wouldn't fancy using complex editing there, but it technically would be possible to also do that on a non-desktop machine if you were out in the field. Yeah, because it's run through a browser ultimately.
Awesome. We've had another question come in. Is ArcGIS Image available in platform? Scott.
Is ArcGIS Image available through platform? So the capabilities that ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online offer, so image management and so on, are not currently available through platform. I guess it's an interesting question about how you combine, so ArcGIS Platform, or Location Platform, as it is now known, is a developer-focused technology allowing you to put mapping capabilities into apps, either online apps, web apps, or native apps. In terms of some of those advanced image capabilities, that's not something which is available through the platform mechanism. But there are architectures or patterns that would allow you to combine those two, where you're using ArcGIS Online with some of the image analysis capabilities, for example, to create layers, to create output, which could then be consumed through ArcGIS Platform using the private data capabilities. So it's definitely possible if you actually sort of combine those two different metaphors.
Awesome, thanks, Scott. And we've got another question that really has Claire's name written all over it. And performance testing and system integration testing is a component that GIS project teams are continually having to conduct. Are there any upcoming webinars or training focused on this, specifically Apache JMeter? Claire.
So currently no, it's a short answer, but I would definitely take it to the team and ask if we can put in a webinar into the series around that particular item. I think too, it might be something that we could perhaps topic that we could consider for conference, which might be something that Scott's team could have a think about potentially. And we'll definitely get back to you, Kat, about potentially some, and looking at it from a very specific aspect for yourself and your organisation as well. And on the note of future webinars, we do have two coming up in August. So on the 15th of August, we have our ArcGIS Online Managing Content and Credits webinar coming up, and then on the 29th of August we have the overview of licensing in ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise webinar, and both of those start at 11 AM, our standard time for webinars. And on top of that, we will be taking a break from webinars over September, but I just wanted to remind you that we do have the New Zealand Esri User Conference coming up in September. That's why we're taking a break from webinars. And it's going to be happening here in Wellington, and registrations are open for that. So please do feel free to use the QR code to head out to the New Zealand Esri User Conference website. And just on that note, I know that the agenda is just about to go live on the website, the final agenda, overview at a glance agenda. And so there will be some notifications going out for people with presentations that they've submitted and been accepted for, but also for people who are looking to register for conference. You'll get a better idea of what's actually going to be presented throughout the conference. And that might mean that you're able to say, yes, I definitely want to go to a conference even more now that we've got the full agenda. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you shortly, either in person at conference or in another webinar in August. Mā te wā.
Thanks, Claire.